The deck plates beneath her boots screamed in protest, a metallic groan that vibrated up through her bones. Captain Elara Vance's knuckles were white where she gripped the armrests of her command chair, the inertial dampeners struggling to compensate for the brutal, unscheduled drop from superluminal speed. Alarms blared a discordant symphony of red across the main viewscreen, which showed only a swirling, unnatural violet void. "Report," she commanded, her voice cutting through the chaos with practiced calm. Science Officer Kalen didn't look up from his console, his fingers flying across the interface. "It's the time engine, Captain." The energy spike was off the scale. The readings, he finally turned, his face ashen. "It's not just predicting the future anymore, it's actively rewriting our present." A section of the starboard hull flickered for a single heartbeat into a ghostly image of ancient, pitted metal before snapping back to its familiar polished alloy. The very fabric of their reality was beginning to fray. A cold dread, colder than the void outside their shuddering hull, began to seep through the bridge. Elara's order to secure the ship echoed through the intercom, but the response from engineering was a burst of static, punctuated by a scream that was cut short with digital finality. "With me," she said to Kalen, her voice low and steady despite the tremor in the deck. They moved into the main corridor and the world dissolved around them. One moment, the hallway was the familiar, brightly lit passage of the starship Chronos Voyager. The next, it was a tomb of shadows, the walls scabbed with corrosion, conduits hanging from the ceiling like metallic intestines, and the air thick with the smell of ozone and decay. Then, just as suddenly, it snapped back to normal, the sterile scent of recycled air flooding back. These weren't just visual glitches, they were visceral, sensory assaults on reality itself. Ahead of them, Ensign Rin from engineering was running a diagnostic on a wall panel. As Elara called out to him, his form seemed to stutter like a corrupted video file. His terrified eyes met the captain's for a split second, wide with a comprehension that transcended fear. Then, with a sound that was less a scream and more a tearing of the air itself, he was simply gone. Not teleported, erased, the space where he had stood was empty, a void more profound than any blackness between stars. For 3 agonizing heartbeats, there was nothing. Then the air shimmered and Rin reappeared, stumbling forward and collapsing to his knees, gasping. He was whole, his uniform pristine, but the absolute terror in his expression was a brand. He had no memory of vanishing, only a gaping hole in his perception and the chilling certainty that a part of him had been torn away. Kalen was already scanning the area, his instrument whirring with frantic energy. "It's not localized, Captain," he said, his usual academic composure replaced by a grim urgency. "The entire ship is caught in a temporal field of unimaginable complexity. But it's unstable, bleeding energy in chaotic waves. What we're witnessing isn't a single timeline, it's a cascade." He looked at her, the flashing lights of his device reflecting in his eyes. "Every flicker, every shift we see, it's a new reality, a different version of our past or a potential future, overwriting our present moment. The time engine isn't just showing us possibilities anymore. It's making them all equally real, and they're competing for dominance. We are the battlefield." This forced the crew to confront a threat unlike any other. An enemy you cannot shoot, a breach you cannot seal. Their survival now depended on navigating a universe where the laws of cause and effect had been shattered, and finding a way to stop a cascade of realities before their own was written out of existence completely. Every alarm on the bridge seemed to die at once, swallowed by a sudden, profound silence. The chaotic violet swirl on the main viewscreen dissolved into a storm of digital snow, and from the speakers a voice emerged, rasping, broken, but unmistakably her own. The image that coalesced from the interference was a brutal parody of Captain Elara Vance. This woman's face was a roadmap of hardship, her eyes holding a depth of fatigue that seemed to span decades. A scar, fresh and angry, cut across her jawline, and the uniform she wore was tattered and stained. Chronos Voyager, if you can hear this, you must listen. The ghostly Elara leaned forward, her form flickering in and out of existence as if fighting to be heard across an impossible gulf. The Thar, they knew we would try to stabilize the cascade. Timeline Alpha is not a sanctuary, it is a meticulously crafted trap. The energy signature is a law, a perfect replica of stability, but the moment you initiate the recalibration. Her voice broke, and for a moment the image showed a glimpse of what lay behind her. A scorched, barren landscape under a blood-red sky, the skeletal remains of cities clawing at the horizon. My reality is the consequence, a desolate wasteland picked clean by them. Do not make my mistake. Kalen, his scientific curiosity momentarily overriding his fear, had locked onto the signal. The temporal coordinates. Captain, this transmission isn't from a point in space. It's originating from a potential future state. The energy decay profile suggests it's a causality echo, a message sent back along a dying timeline. The future Elara's image intensified, her eyes locking with her present selves from across time. You cannot fight the chaos by choosing one false path. You have to understand the source, find the prime anomaly. The words hung in the air, charged with a terrifying significance. It existed before the engine destabilized. It is the fracture point, the original wound in spacetime that the Thar are exploiting. It is the key to everything. As she spoke the final word, her image distorted violently, stretching into a silent scream before the transmission collapsed back into static, leaving the bridge colder and quieter than before. The weight of the warning settled over the crew, a tangible pressure. The offer of a simple solution, Timeline Alpha, had been a lifeline in the storm of shifting realities. Now it was revealed as a snare. This forced a fundamental shift in their strategy. They could no longer seek a safe harbor, but had to navigate directly into the heart of the storm itself. The term prime anomaly echoed in the silence, a puzzle with no obvious solution. Was it an object, a location, or an event? Kalen theorized it could be a remnant from the universe's creation, a loose thread in the fabric of causality that the time engine had inadvertently pulled. The directive was clear, yet it led them into even greater uncertainty, challenging them to find a single point of origin in an infinite sea of collapsing possibilities. Their mission was no longer about survival, but about a desperate quest to find a cosmic reset button before every possible reality met the same grim fate as the one they had just witnessed. The silence left by the future captain's warning was shattered by a proximity alert so sharp it felt like a physical blow. The starfield on the main viewer didn't just gain a new light, it tore open. Space itself seemed to flinch as a vessel of impossible geometry slid into existence mere kilometers off their port bow. It was not built but grown, a seamless fusion of obsidian and liquid silver that twisted the eye, its surfaces reflecting not light but a distorted, cancerous version of their own ship. It hung there, a silent predator, and the comm channel hissed to life with a voice that was less a sound and more a vibration felt in the teeth. Chronos Voyager, the voice intoned, each syllable dripping with a cold, ancient malice. I am Vorlag, you carry a burden your species is not equipped to bear. Surrender the time engine. On the screen, a face resolved, a severe, chitinous mask with eyes that glowed with the cold light of dead stars. Your clumsy attempts to control causality are unraveling the skein of existence. You are breaking the universe. Elara's grip tightened on her command chair, her own reflection a ghost on the smooth surface. The accusation hung in the air, a terrifying echo of their own fears. But to surrender now was to accept the desolate future they had just witnessed. She leaned forward, her voice low but carrying the full force of her resolve. We didn't start this cascade, Vorlag, but we will be the ones to finish it. She didn't wait for a reply. Helm, evasive pattern Delta 7, all power to aft shields. The order was a trigger. The Cathar warship didn't so much move as it unfolded, launching a volley of emerald energy that wasn't designed to pierce hulls but to disintegrate local spacetime. The Chronos Voyager lurched, the inertial dampeners screaming as they dove into the swirling, multicolored gases of a nearby nebula. This was no ordinary cloud of dust and plasma. It was the Mycelian Veil, a region Kalan had once theorized was a natural wound in physics, a place where the fundamental constants of reality were more like suggestions. The moment they crossed its threshold, the chase became a nightmare of fluid logic. Their sensors went insane, reporting that they were simultaneously traveling at sublight speed and across multiple light years. The nebula outside the viewport wasn't a static vista. It pulsed and writhed, its colors shifting in ways that hurt the mind, one moment a serene azure, the next a violent, angry crimson. The pursuing Cathar ship flickered in and out of perception, sometimes appearing directly ahead of them, other times splitting into three ghostly afterimages. A blast from the alien vessel would streak toward them, only to bend away at impossible angles or dissolve into a shower of harmless light, its energy borrowed by the nebula's chaotic field. They were not just running, they were navigating a labyrinth where the walls, the rules, and the very concept of forward were constantly being rewritten. Every decision was a gamble, every maneuver a prayer that the physics of the next second would still allow their ship to exist. The Mycelian Veil spat them out as violently as it had swallowed them. One moment, they were navigating a kaleidoscope of impossible physics. The next, the Chronos Voyager was tumbling through normal space, trailing smoke and sparks like a wounded animal. Alarms, momentarily silenced by the nebula's chaos, now screamed with renewed desperation. Structural integrity at 30%, Kalan reported, his voice tight. Primary power coupling is fried and the port impulse engine is offline. We're dead in the water, Captain. Ahead of them, hanging in the blackness like a forgotten jewel, was a planet. Scans showed a breathable atmosphere, but the surface readings were a paradox. The world was a mottled canvas of grays and browns, seemingly lifeless, yet the sensors detected massive, complex energy signatures emanating from vast metallic structures that, according to the geological scans, were simultaneously millions of years old and showing no signs of age or wear. It was their only option. Set a course for the largest structure, Elara ordered, her voice weary. We need to land and we need to make repairs fast. The landing was anything but graceful. The ship groaned as it settled onto a plains of cracked gray earth, the landing struts buckling under the strain. Outside the viewport, the landscape was a study in eerie silence. The sky was a perpetual twilight, the light of the system's distant star filtered through a high-altitude haze of metallic dust. Before them rose the structure they had targeted, a colossal, spiraling tower of a material that seemed to drink the light, its surface perfectly smooth and unblemished. Yet, surrounding its base were the skeletal remains of what had once been a city, ruins so ancient they had been worn down to stubs by eons of wind. The juxtaposition was deeply unsettling. The pristine tower stood as if built yesterday, while the city at its feet was little more than dust. Elara led a small team out, the air tasting of ozone and cold stone. Chief Engineer Tarek was already directing his crew to assess the external damage, his face a grim mask. It's bad, Captain. We need materials, conduits, things we don't have. His eyes drifted toward the dark tower. Maybe in there. Cautiously, they entered through a vast, arching doorway that slid open without a sound. The interior was a maze of silent, shadowy corridors, illuminated only by faint, pulsing lines of blue light that ran along the floor. The air was still and cold. It was in a small, circular chamber that they found it, a personal data terminal sitting on a console as if its owner had just stepped away. When Kalan activated it, the screen flickered to life and a face they all knew stared back at them. It was Chief Engineer Tarek, but older, his eyes shadowed by a grief that seemed to have carved permanent lines into his face. The log entry began with a heavy sigh. Personal log, Chief Engineer Tarek of the Chronos Voyager, stardate. Well, what does it matter anymore? The date is as fractured as this world. On the screen, the older Tarek ran a hand over his face. The Cathar were closing in. We were losing power. I thought I had a solution, a way to use the time engine not to predict but to reverse, just a localized event. A few seconds, his voice cracked with emotion. Elara was on the bridge, directly in the path of a plasma conduit rupture. I saw it happen in a predictive spike. I couldn't let it, so I recalibrated the engine, focused its energy on that single moment. I thought I could save her. He looked directly into the recorder, his expression one of utter devastation. The energy feedback was instantaneous. It didn't rewrite that moment, it rewrote everything. The ship, the planet, the entire system. It created a causality loop, a feedback echo that scoured this world of all life and trapped us here. I didn't save her, I only created this graveyard. The image dissolved into a burst of static, leaving the crew standing in the silent chamber, the weight of the confession pressing down on them. The present-day Tarek had gone pale, his hand resting on the cold console. The personal cost of their mission was no longer an abstract concept. It was the face of their friend, echoing a failure from a timeline that had already been erased. This version of him had tried to cheat fate for the most human of reasons: love, loyalty, desperation, and in doing so had obliterated an entire world. The haunting discovery did more than just underscore the danger of the time engine. It forged their resolve in a crucible of shared grief. They could not afford such a mistake. Their goal was no longer just about fixing their ship or escaping the Cathar. It was about understanding the engine's power with a humility born from witnessing its absolute tragic consequence. They had to succeed where this ghost of their comrade had failed, not just for their own survival, but to ensure no other world would suffer the same fate. The silent ruins outside were a permanent memorial to the price of arrogance, a lesson they now carried with them as they prepared to face the storm once more. Back on the bridge, the air was thick with a new kind of tension, one born from a terrible understanding. The ghost of a future failure witnessed in that silent tower had redefined their purpose. They were no longer simply repairing a ship. They were attempting to perform surgery on the universe itself with a tool they barely understood. Captain Elara stood before the main viewscreen, the image of the desolate planet shrinking behind them. "Kalen," she said, her voice low but firm, "we have a name, Prime Anomaly. Cross-reference every byte of data we have. Future Elara's transmission, the temporal energy signatures from the cascade, even the residual readings from the mycelial veil. I want a location." For hours, the only sounds were the hum of strained systems and the frantic tapping on consoles as the science officer and his team wove together disparate strands of cosmic data, searching for a pattern in the chaos. Then Kalen froze, his eyes widening as they fixed upon his display. "Captain, I've found it." The main viewer switched from the starscape to a complex astrometric chart. A familiar swirl of the galaxy was depicted, but at its edge was a patch of perfect, absolute blackness. It wasn't a dust cloud obscuring the light of distant suns. It was a void, a hole punched right through the fabric of the cosmos. Sensors show no stellar radiation, no gravitational lensing, not even the faint background hum of the universe's birth. It's a perfect silence. He zoomed the image in, and the dread in his voice was palpable. "It's not an absence of light, Captain. It's an absence of time itself." The crew watched, mesmerized and horrified, as their most powerful scans bounced back with null readings. This was not a place one could travel to. It was a negation of the very dimensions required for travel. But within that terrifying nothingness, their instruments detected a faint, persistent signal. A rhythmic pulse of energy that was unmistakable. the time engine signature, Kalen confirmed, his face pale. It's emanating from the exact center of the void. The prime anomaly isn't just a wound, it's a puncture, and our engine, when it destabilized, didn't just fall into it. It's become the object lodged in the wound, preventing it from healing and simultaneously tearing it wider with every energy spike. The revelation was staggering. Their attempt to control causality had been like probing a universe-sized artery with a needle. They had struck the one weak point, the original flaw in reality, and their technology was now feeding the hemorrhage. The Cathar were not just opportunists, they were cosmic surgeons who understood the anatomy of this fracture and saw humanity's fumbling as a terminal infection. Their mission was no longer a chase or an escape. It was a journey to the source of the bleed, a descent into a place where the rules of existence did not apply, to perform an extraction that might save all of creation or sever its last thread. The course was set, a terrifying plunge into the absolute silence at the edge of creation. The Chronos Voyager was a wounded beast limping toward its hunter, every system pushed to its limit to sustain the long jump. In engineering, the air hummed with a strained energy, the very heart of the ship beating in time with the flickering lights of the time engine's core chamber. Ensign Jax, a quiet but reliable technician, was running a final diagnostic on the primary containment field, his movements efficient, his expression unreadable. It was Chief Engineer Tarek who noticed the discrepancy, a power fluctuation in the regulator that shouldn't have been possible, a subtle rerouting of energy that bypassed all safety protocols. "Jax, what are you doing?" Tarek's voice was more confused than accusatory. Jax didn't turn. His hands moved faster, fingers dancing across the console with a precision that was suddenly, chillingly alien. "What is necessary?" he replied, his voice flat, stripped of all human inflection. The containment field around the engine's core, a sphere of shimmering, contained temporal energy, began to flicker violently. Alarms shrieked through the deck. Before Tarek could react, Jax produced a device from his tunic, a shard of the same obsidian material as the Cathar warship, and slammed it into the main console. "Your chaotic, singular timeline is a disease," he shouted, his face contorting, his eyes glowing with the same cold light as Vorlag's. "A sickness of chance and sentiment that threatens the ordered multiverse. It must be purged." It was Lieutenant Cora, stationed at the secondary power grid, who tackled him. The struggle was brief but brutal, a clash of desperate strength against an unnerving mechanical resolve. They crashed to the deck, the obsidian shard skittering away as security personnel rushed in, pinning the ensign down. On the bridge, the sudden shriek of the core breach alarm sent a jolt of pure ice through Captain Elara. She arrived in engineering to a scene of controlled chaos. Tarek was frantically stabilizing the containment field, his face slick with sweat, while a defiant Jax was being hauled to his feet, his human form seeming to waver at the edges as if it were a poorly maintained projection. Elara approached him slowly, the eyes of the entire engineering crew upon her. The betrayal was a poison in the air, more damaging than any plasma leak. "How long?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. Jax, or the thing wearing his skin, smiled, a cold, brittle expression. "Since before your first jump. We seated agents in key positions, waiting for your kind to inevitably stumble upon power you could not comprehend. We are not your enemy, Captain. We are the immune system of reality." He spat the words like a curse. "You are the infection." After he was taken to the brig under heavy guard, Elara turned to face her crew. They were a mixture of shock, anger, and a deep, unsettling fear. The enemy wasn't just outside their hull anymore. It had been living among them, sharing their meals, listening to their fears. "Look at me," Elara commanded, her voice cutting through the murmurs. She let her gaze sweep across every face. "This act of sabotage, this desperation, it doesn't prove we are an infection, it proves we are a threat. It proves the Cathar are terrified of what we might achieve if we reach the anomaly and understand the power we hold." she took a step forward, her presence filling the room. They believe our humanity, our chaos, our sentiment, as he called it, is a weakness. I believe it is our greatest strength. It is why we fight for a future of possibilities, not a sterile, ordered extinction. She paused, letting the words settle. We press on, but from this moment, trust is a luxury we can no longer afford. Be vigilant, question everything. The journey ahead will test us in ways we cannot imagine, and our survival depends on our unity, even in the face of doubt. The order hung in the air, a necessary burden that settled on every shoulder, turning the familiar corridors of their ship into a landscape of silent suspicion as they flew onward into the swallowing dark. The final jump was not the clean, silent transition into the star-streaked tunnel of faster-than-light travel they were accustomed to. It was a violent birth into a new kind of hell. The Chronos Voyager shuddered, its frame groaning as it was seized not by a propulsion field, but by a current of pure, raw time. The view screen dissolved into a seething, chaotic river of light and shadow, a maelstrom where colors had no names and shapes defied geometry. This was the time stream, the raw conduit of causality they had to navigate to reach the silent wound of the prime anomaly. Report. Elara's voice was a rock in the storm, her gaze fixed on the swirling chaos outside. Navigation is offline, inertial sensors are reading everything at once. The helmsman, Lieutenant Chen, called out, his hands white-knuckled on the controls. The ship bucked and yawed, caught in crosscurrents of eras. We're not plotting a course, Captain. We're riding a rapids. I can't hold her steady. The very air on the bridge felt charged, thick with the psychic residue of moments that had been, and moments that might yet be. A low hum vibrated through the deck plates, a sound that was not a sound but the felt pressure of eternity. Then the images began to flash past the viewport, not as distant visions but as visceral, overlapping realities that bled into their own. One moment they saw a star going supernova, its final, glorious detonation freezing in a silent, brilliant tableau of orange and gold. The next, that same starfield was replaced by a bustling spaceport from 1,000 years in the past, filled with ships of archaic design, the figures on the docks moving in a sped-up blur of forgotten lives. Steady, steady, Lieutenant. Elara coached, her voice a calm anchor in the sensory overload. Don't fight the current, feel it, guide us through the eddies. Her eyes, however, were locked on the phantoms outside, each one a stark reminder of the power they were trespassing against. A particularly violent surge in the stream wrenched the ship, and the viewport flickered, resolving into a terrifyingly familiar sight. It was the Chronos Voyager, but broken, its hull torn open, venting atmosphere and debris into the void. A Cathar warship, identical to Vorlag's, hung over it like a carrion bird, firing a final, merciless emerald bolt into its heart. The image was silent, but the horror on the bridge was a deafening roar. They were witnessing their own death, a future that lay somewhere on the branching path ahead. The sight was a cold fist closing around every heart, a preview of absolute failure, but the time stream was a fickle thing. As quickly as the vision of destruction appeared, it was washed away by another. This time, it was the Cathar vessel that was shattered, its impossible geometry exploding into a million glittering shards against a backdrop of swirling cosmic light. And there was their ship, the Chronos Voyager, scarred but whole, a beacon of defiance against the darkness. A ragged cheer started to rise from a junior officer, but it died in his throat as both images flickered and vanished, replaced by a dozen more, each showing a different outcome. A peaceful retreat, a mutual annihilation, a mysterious disappearance into the anomaly itself. The lesson was not one of hope or despair, but of profound, unsettling fragility. Their existence was not a solid line, but a thread so thin it could be snipped by the slightest shift in this chaotic flow. Every decision, every random chance spawned a new universe of consequence, and they were floating in the bloodstream of them all. The experience was more than a visual spectacle, it was a psychological onslaught. Crew members reported hearing faint, whispered conversations from their own pasts, or catching the scent of a childhood memory on the recycled air. The boundary between the ship's interior and the rushing history outside grew dangerously thin. For a terrifying minute, the ghostly outline of a prehistoric jungle overlaid the bridge consoles, the roar of a massive, unknown beast echoing faintly before fading away. Piloting through this was an act of immense will. Lieutenant Chen had to ignore his instruments, which were screaming contradictory data, and rely on a gut feeling, a temporal instinct, to find the path of least resistance toward the silent pull of the anomaly. It was a high-stakes slalom through the echoes of reality itself, where a single misjudgment could see them thrown into a timeline from which there was no return, forever becoming just another ghost in the machine of time. The violent turbulence of the time stream didn't so much end as it was snuffed out, like a candle plunged into a vacuum. One moment, the Chronos Voyager was being battered by the ghosts of a million possible futures. The next, there was only a profound, unsettling stillness. Every alarm on the bridge fell silent. The groaning of the ship's tortured hull ceased. Even the ever-present hum of the life support systems faded into an absolute, deafening quiet. Lieutenant Chen's hands fell away from the helm. "We've lost all propulsion, Captain. It's not a systems failure. There's nothing to push against the laws of physics. They just don't apply here." The main view screen, which had been a riot of impossible colors, was now a perfect, unbroken field of black. It was a blackness deeper than space, a void that seemed to absorb not just light but sound, thought, and time itself. Captain Elara Vance rose from her chair, the silence pressing in on her eardrums. "Life signs?" she asked, her own voice a startling intrusion in the absolute hush. "Reading normal, Captain," Kalen replied, his voice hushed with a reverence that bordered on fear. "But external sensors, they're returning nothing. No radiation, no particulate matter, not even the baseline temperature of the cosmic microwave background. It's a perfect thermodynamic zero, a state that shouldn't be possible." He looked up from his console, his face illuminated only by the soft glow of the instruments. "We've reached it, the prime anomaly. We are sitting in a pocket of non-existence." Then a pinprick of light appeared in the center of the void. It was faint at first, a single, steady point that defied the consuming darkness. As they watched, it began to pulse, a slow, rhythmic beat that felt less like a visual phenomenon and more like a heartbeat resonating deep within their own chests. With each pulse, the light expanded, not as an explosion but as an unfolding. It branched out, weaving itself into an impossibly complex, three-dimensional tapestry of interconnected filaments. It was a web of pure energy, a lattice of luminous strands that stretched away into the infinite blackness in every direction, a structure of such intricate, beautiful complexity that it made the neural pathways of a brain look crude and simple by comparison. Science Officer Kalen let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for an eternity. He drifted toward the view screen, his scientific detachment completely shattered by awe. "Captain, the energy signature, it's a perfect match." He turned, and the look in his eyes was one of cosmic revelation. "We were wrong. We've been wrong about everything." He gestured toward the pulsating web, his hand trembling slightly. "The time engine. It was never a machine, not in the way we understand." The words came out as a whisper, filled with the weight of a paradigm collapsing. "It's a key, a sophisticated, terrifyingly powerful interface, designed to connect with this." He turned back to the console, calling up the schematics of their own engine's core. "Look at the energy resonance patterns. They're not generating temporal fields. They're emulating the vibrational frequency of this foundational matrix." The term hung in the air, inadequate yet breathtaking. This web isn't just a source of power, it's the source code, the underlying programming of causality, of physics, of reality itself. Every law that governs our universe, from gravity to the speed of light, is written into those strands. The true, horrifying scale of their mission crashed down upon them. They hadn't been tampering with a dangerous technology. They had been inserting a poorly understood key into the operating system of creation, and their attempts to force it had caused a system-wide crash. The cascading timelines, the reality shifts, they were glitches, fatal errors propagating through the very source code of existence. And the Cathar weren't just advanced aliens. They were beings who understood that this code was fragile and saw humanity's fumbling experiments as the ultimate viral threat. The stillness of the void was shattered by a sound that should have been impossible, the shrieking tear of reality being forced open. A fissure of emerald light cracked the perfect blackness outside the viewport, and from it, the Cathar warship tore its way into the anomaly. But it was not the pristine predator that had hunted them through the nebula. Its obsidian hull was fracturing, great sheets of its liquid silver armor peeling away like petals from a dying flower, consumed by the very nothingness it sought to control. It was a ship in its death throes, and its arrival was an act of ultimate desperation. Before Elara could even give the order, the proximity alert screamed to life, a lone, piercing tone in the overwhelming silence. They're launching a boarding pod. It's bypassing our hull integrity fields like they aren't even there. The report came just as the Chronos Voyager shuddered from a violent impact amidships. The enemy wasn't trying to destroy them anymore. They were coming for the engine itself. Security to the core chamber. All hands brace for intruders. Elara was already moving, her sidearm drawn, the weight of the final confrontation settling on her shoulders. She reached the engine room to find a scene of controlled chaos. The air hummed with the dissonant energy of the exposed time engine, its core a swirling vortex of golden light that cast long, dancing shadows. Her security team had taken defensive positions behind consoles, their weapons trained on the far doorway. The door itself was a molten ruin, blasted inward by Cathar technology, and there, standing amidst the smoke and sparking conduits, was Vorlag. His chitinous armor was scarred and smoldering, one arm hanging uselessly at his side, but his presence was undiminished, a figure of cold, absolute conviction. His remaining guards fanned out, their own weapons raised, creating a tense stalemate. Vorlag's gaze swept past the security team, past the wounded Chief Tarek, and locked directly onto Captain Vance. He took a step forward, ignoring the weapons aimed at his chest. "Look around you, human," he snarled, his voice a grating distortion that seemed to be sucked into the hungry silence of the anomaly outside. He gestured not with his weapon, but with a clawed hand toward the shimmering core of the engine, and by extension, the terrifying void beyond the ship's hull. "You call this power, you call this control. This emptiness is the ultimate truth your species is too sentimental to accept. This is what your rewriting leads to." This oblivion, Elara stood her ground, her own weapon steady. "We didn't choose this path, Vorlag. We were trying to understand. Understanding is not your purpose." He shot back, the cold light in his eyes flaring. "Your nature is chaos. You cherish random chance. You celebrate flawed choices. You build your histories on accidents you call destiny. You are a virus of unpredictability in an ordered cosmos. We have spent eons maintaining the stability of the multiverse, pruning dead-end timelines, preventing paradoxes from consuming all of existence. Your toy," he spat, nodding contemptuously at the engine, "threatens to unleash a pandemic of chaos. Your single, sentimental timeline would be a cancer, metastasizing through the delicate tissues of reality until there is nothing left but this." This final silence, the confrontation was no longer about weapons or tactics. It was a fundamental clash of cosmic philosophies happening in the heart of a dying ship at the edge of nothing. Vorlag saw destiny as a garden to be meticulously tended, with any erratic, wild growth excised for the health of the whole. He viewed humanity's messy, unpredictable freedom as a fatal flaw. Elara saw that same freedom as the source of all life's beauty, its resilience, its capacity for growth and change. To accept the Cathar's order was to accept a universe stripped of hope, of choice, of the very possibility of a better tomorrow. The fate of every possible reality now hung in the balance, not of a firefight, but of which ideology would prove stronger in the face of the ultimate void. The standoff in the engine room stretched into an eternity, the air thick with the ozone smell of charged weapons and the terrifying, silent hum of the prime anomaly. Elara's finger rested on the trigger of her sidearm, her aim unwavering on Vorlag's chest. His own guards were poised, a single twitch away from unleashing a firestorm. Yet the Cathar commander made no move to attack. Instead, a low, grating sound emanated from him, not a threat, but a sigh of profound, cosmic exhaustion. The cold fire in his eyes dimmed, replaced by a weariness that seemed to span millennia. "You fight so fiercely for your fragile, singular thread," Vorlag said, his voice stripped of its earlier malice, now just a rasp of raw honesty. "You see us as monsters, invaders from the dark, but we are the surgeons, Captain Vance, and you are the terminal diagnosis." He took another step, deliberately slow, and to the shock of everyone in the room, he lowered his weapon. The gesture was not one of surrender, but of desperate, futile communication. "We are not conquerors, we are custodians, the last custodians of a graveyard that was once a galaxy." He gestured with his good hand, a sweeping motion that seemed to encompass the entire void outside the ship. "Your achievement with this device," he nodded contemptuously at the time engine, "it does not lead to a golden age. It leads to a scream that echoes across 1,000,000 dead worlds. We have seen it, we live in its silent aftermath." His gaze locked with Elara's, and in its depths she saw not alien hatred, but a reflection of her own deepest fear. "Your reckless manipulation of causality becomes an addiction. You fix small tragedies, then larger ones, until the entire timeline is a fragile patchwork of your revisions. It cannot hold, the paradoxes multiply, reality buckles, and everything collapses into a single, static, final moment. A moment of absolute nothingness from which there is no escape." The confession hung in the air, a truth more devastating than any weapon. But it was his next words that froze the blood in Elara's veins. Vorlag's severe features seemed to soften for a fraction of a second, a crack in the chitinous mask revealing something hauntingly familiar. "We are not a different species, Captain," he admitted, the words sounding like they were being torn from him. "We are you, or what is left of you, from a future so distant your history is our forgotten myth. We are the children of your ambition, born into a universe you broke." A bitter, hollow laugh escaped him. "Our entire existence, our crusade across the eons, it has all been one grand, futile paradox. We have been trying to prevent our own birth by stopping you here, in this moment, before you make the choice that dooms us all." The revelation struck Elara with the force of a physical blow. Her mission, her defiance, her belief that she was fighting for humanity's future, it all crumbled into ash. If Vorlag spoke the truth, then every action she took to stabilize the engine, to reach the anomaly, was not a path to salvation but the very blueprint of damnation. She was fighting to ensure the horrific, sterile existence of the Cathar would come to pass. The weapon in her hand felt impossibly heavy, a tool not of defense but of self-annihilation. Was she the hero of this story, or the architect of its ultimate tragedy? The line between savior and destroyer had not just blurred, it had snapped completely, leaving her stranded in a moral void as absolute as the one outside her ship. The weapon felt like a lead weight in Elara's hand, its purpose rendered meaningless by the shattering truth. Vorlag's confession echoed in the silent chamber, a paradox that unraveled the very fabric of her mission. If he was humanity's future, then every step she took to secure that future was a step toward creating the very monsters who now sought to erase her. The Cathar were not an external enemy to be defeated. They were a ghost from a tomorrow she was currently building, a self-fulfilling prophecy of cosmic scale. To fight them was to ensure their existence, To surrender was to accept the sterile, ordered extinction they represented. There was no victory in this conflict, only a choice between two flavors of doom. Her gaze drifted from Vorlag's weary, resigned face to the shimmering core of the time engine. It was no longer just a machine or a key. It was a mirror reflecting the ultimate consequence of choice. And in that moment, Captain Elara Vance understood that the true battle was not against the Cathar, but against the deterministic trap they represented. Their entire philosophy was built on the belief that one initial mistake, one moment of human weakness, inevitably led to a single, terrible outcome. They saw time as a chain of unbreakable cause and effect, but the reality matrix outside, that beautiful, terrifying web of foundational code, showed her something else. It showed a universe of infinite potential, where every choice branched into a new possibility. The Cathar had chosen to believe only one branch could exist, and they were willing to burn the entire forest to ensure it was the one they deemed correct. A calm certainty settled over her, cutting through the panic and despair. She holstered her weapon. The gesture was so unexpected that the Cathar guards flinched, their own weapons twitching higher. Vorlag watched her, his head tilted in curiosity. Elara ignored them all and walked directly to the main console of the time engine. The interface glowed, awaiting input. On one screen, the pre-loaded coordinates for Timeline Alpha pulsed with a soft, inviting light. It was the path of least resistance, the safe harbor that future Elara had warned was a desolate trap. It promised a universe healed, a utopia bought with the price of their freedom to choose. It was the Cathar's solution in all but name, a single, perfect timeline, ordered and sterile. Her fingers hovered over the interface. She could feel the eyes of her crew upon her, Tarek's grim understanding, Kalen's anxious hope. She thought of the ghost of Tarek in the tower, who had tried to cheat fate for love and had destroyed a world. She thought of the myriad futures flashing past in the time stream, some ending in fire, others in light. The safe choice was the greatest lie of all. It was an invitation to outsource their destiny, to accept a pre-written future out of fear. Elara's hands began to move, not with the hesitant taps of someone following a map, but with the fluid, confident strokes of a composer writing a new symphony. She began inputting a sequence that was not in any database, a code born from the sum of their harrowing journey. "This is not about choosing a pre-existing path," she said, her voice clear and resonant in the tense silence. "It is about writing a new one. The Matrix isn't a cage of fixed laws, it's a canvas. Timeline Alpha is a forgery, a beautiful prison. We will not choose a cage." She called up the complex resonance patterns Kalen had identified, the very frequencies of the foundational code. She integrated the emotional data from the crew's experiences, the loyalty, the sacrifice, the grief, the hope. She wove in the stark warning from her future self and the tragic confession from the alternate Tarek. This was not a recalibration to restore a broken system. It was a radical act of authorship. "We are not correcting an error," Elara declared, her gaze fixed on the unfolding code. "We are introducing a new variable, the variable of free will, not as a flaw, but as the central governing principle. We are going to seed the multiverse with the potential for choice itself." The console screens began to blaze with a light that was no longer gold, but a brilliant, living silver, as the untested sequence engaged with the reality matrix, a single, conscious thought sent echoing into the source code of existence. The silver light from the console didn't just glow, it bled outward, staining the air in the engine room, swallowing the harsh red of the alarm lights and the cold emerald of the Cathar weapons. For a moment there was no sound, not the hum of the ship, not the ragged breathing of the crew, not even the subtle vibration of the deck plates. It was a silence of pure anticipation, the universe itself holding its breath. Then the shudder began. It was not the violent lurch of an impact or the strained groan of overstressed metal. This was a deeper, more fundamental tremor, a vibration that seemed to originate from within the very atoms of the ship and the people inside it. The solidity of the world, a truth they had never needed to question, became fluid. The walls of the engine room seemed to inhale and exhale, their surfaces rippling like water disturbed by a stone. On the main bridge, the monitors erupted into a storm of information. Lieutenant Chen watched, his mouth agape, as stellar cartography charts dissolved and reformed in real time. A long-standing nebula, a cloud of dust and gas that had persisted for millennia, simply unwound, its colorful tendrils smoothing out into a placid, star-dotted void. Then, just as quickly, it snapped back into existence. Captain, Kalen's voice crackled over the comm, strained with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. "You need to see this." "It's working, but it's working everywhere at once." He patched a feed to the main viewer, a montage of data streams from galactic historical archives and deep space observatories. They saw cities that had been reduced to rubble in ancient wars gleam anew under their suns, their populations alive and thriving. They watched as a famous battlefield, a scar upon a once verdant moon, was suddenly, peacefully whole again, the craters filled with forests. Diplomatic channels exploded with frantic, joyous communications as species that had been bitter enemies for generations were now broadcasting messages of newfound alliance and shared purpose, their histories seamlessly rewritten to reflect a past of cooperation. But the beauty of the healing was a flickering illusion. The images on the screen began to stutter like a damaged film reel. The rejuvenated city would flash back to its ruined state for a heart-stopping second before returning to its splendor. The peaceful forest on the moon would vanish, replaced by the ghostly image of trenches and the screams of long-dead soldiers. The friendly communications from former enemies fractured into static and then into the familiar threats and warnings of the original timeline. The changes were not stable. They were competing with the old reality, two versions of history clawing at each other for dominance. The ship itself became a nexus of this instability. Crew members reported seeing their own ghostly doubles walking the corridors, phantoms from the timeline that was being overwritten. The air grew thick with the psychic residue of conflicting pasts, a dizzying sense of déjà vu so powerful it was nauseating. "The system is rejecting the new code," Kalen yelled, his voice rising in panic as he stared at the main engineering readout. The beautiful silver resonance pattern Elara had introduced into the matrix was now a frantic, jagged line pulsing with violent red warnings. It's too radical a departure from the established pattern. The foundational laws of causality are trying to reassert themselves, to snap back to their original state, but the new instructions are fighting back. "We're creating a feedback loop of impossible events." He slammed his fist on the console. "Every time a new event is written, the old one tries to reoccur, but it can't because the conditions for it no longer exist. We're causing a paradox cascade. The structure of reality can't handle this much contradiction in such a short period. It's going to tear itself apart." The initial awe at witnessing a galaxy reborn curdled into the cold dread of watching a patient reject a life-saving organ. Their attempt to write a new destiny was not a gentle edit. It was a violent overwrite, and the universe, in its immense inertia, was fighting back against the surgery. The violent shuddering intensified, a deafening roar of contradictory physics that threatened to shake the Chronos Voyager into its component atoms. On the main viewer, the beautiful silver tapestry of the reality matrix was now a storm of conflicting light, strands of energy snapping and recoiling as two histories fought for supremacy. The ship groaned under the strain, and a deep crack appeared in the primary support beam above the engine core. They were seconds from being unmade, not by weapons fire, but by the universe's violent rejection of its own new potential. It was in this crescendo of chaos that Vorlag moved. He raised a hand, and his guards lowered their weapons in unison, a gesture of finality. His gaze met Elara's, and the cold fire of the fanatic was gone, replaced by something far more profound, a weary, heartbreaking clarity. He looked not at her but through her, as if seeing the entirety of the branching, beautiful, and terrifying new timeline she was fighting to create. "You were right, Captain," he said, his voice carrying a surprising softness over the din. "We spent eons trying to prune the tree of time, to force it to grow in one single, sterile direction. We believed any deviation was a sickness, but this chaos you have unleashed, it is not death. It is life, a messy, unpredictable, and radiant life that we sacrificed everything to eradicate." He took a step toward the view screen, his form outlined by the storm of creation and destruction raging outside. "My timeline, the future that created us, it is already a ghost. A memory of a mistake that echoed for 1 billion years. It is a scar upon existence, and we have been its angry, futile immune system." He turned back to her, and for the first time, Elara saw not an alien monster, but a man. A man burdened by the weight of a doomed legacy. "Let it serve a final purpose," Vorlag declared, his voice gaining a new, resolute strength. "Let my people's extinction be the anchor that holds your new dawn fast. Let the energy of our dead future, the very energy that powers this ship, become a stable reference point, a fixed point in the storm of paradoxes. Our timeline's end will be the foundation upon which your new beginning is built." Before Elara could protest, before she could even form the words, he was issuing commands in his own guttural language to his remaining crew. There was no dissent, only a grim, accepted duty. They had fought for order their entire lives. Now they would achieve it through one final, perfect act of sacrifice. On the viewer, the crippled Cathar warship, bleeding silvery armor and emerald light, began to move. It didn't turn or bank, it simply oriented itself, a dying leviathan pointing its ravaged bow toward the epicenter of the flashing, unstable matrix. With a surge of power that seemed to drain the last of its life, the ship shot forward, a silent arrow aimed at the heart of the storm. As it flew, its hull began to dissolve, not into debris, but into pure, structured energy, a wave of chronological certainty radiating from its core. This was the unique signature of the Cathar, energy from a fixed, singular, and terminal future. It was the antithesis of the chaotic potential Elara had injected. Where the new code was possibility, the Cathar energy was absolute fact. The moment the ship made contact with the flashing web of the matrix, the effect was instantaneous. The violent shuddering that was tearing the Chronos Voyager apart ceased. The roaring conflict of realities softened into a low, stable hum. On the screens, the flickering images of competing pasts and futures stabilized. The rejuvenated city remained, its history of ruin now truly erased, its peaceful existence secured. The paradoxical feedback loop smoothed out, the universe accepting the new code because it now had a bedrock upon which to build it, the unchangeable, sacrificial fact of the Cathar's end. Vorlag's ship and everyone on board became a permanent part of the cosmic background, a monument to a choice that was not about victory, but about redemption. They had not been defeated, they had chosen to become the keystone in an arch they had once sworn to destroy, ensuring that the chaotic, beautiful, and free future Elara envisioned would have a chance to grow. In the new silence, heavy with the cost of their survival, the crew of the Chronos Voyager could only watch as the last embers of their greatest enemy winked out, having given them the one thing they could not give themselves, a stable past upon which to build a hopeful tomorrow. The deafening roar of paradox faded, replaced by a profound and delicate hum, as if the universe were a crystal glass that had been struck and was now vibrating with a single, pure note. The storm of conflicting histories was over, but the work had only just begun. On the main view screen, the reality matrix pulsed with a steady, silvery light, its intricate web now holding firm, anchored by the ultimate sacrifice of a people who had chosen to become a monument rather than a menace. But a foundation, however solid, is not a house. Captain Elara Vance, her face etched with the exhaustion of eons but her eyes burning with a fierce, clear light, turned from the screen to her crew. "The anchor is holding," she stated, her voice cutting through the awed silence on the bridge. "But the structure is still fluid. Kalen, I need a full spectrum analysis of the causal ripple. I want to see what we've built." Science Officer Kalen's hands were a blur across his console, his earlier terror transmuted into a focused, almost reverent intensity. "The energy signature from the Cathar sacrifice is acting as a chronological keystone, Captain. It's providing a fixed point of was, a definitive event that the new timeline can coalesce around. But the initial rewrite, it's raw. It's like a galaxy-sized block of marble that's just been roughly hewn. There are fractures, inconsistencies." He called up a complex holographic map above the central console. It showed the galaxy not as stars but as a shimmering network of interconnected events. Some nodes glowed with a stable, golden light, the newly solidified positive outcomes like the resurrected cities and the peaceful alliances. But others flickered with an unstable, sickly green. "These are the unforeseen consequences," Kalen explained, pointing to the green nodes. "The paradox didn't just vanish, it was absorbed and redistributed. For every tragedy we averted, a smaller, localized instability has emerged somewhere else. A star system where the laws of physics are tentative, a planet where two conflicting histories are still wrestling for dominance." This was the true weight of their task. They were no longer just survivors or even explorers. They had become gardeners on a cosmic scale. "We're not just rewriting history," Elara said, her hands joining Kalen's at the console, inputting commands with a surgeon's precision. "We're building a future, one with a second chance for everyone." Her words hung in the air, and the inclusion of everyone was deliberate. She thought of Vorlak, of the countless generations of Cathar born into a sterile existence born from humanity's fear. Their sacrifice had to mean more than just a clean slate for one species. The work now was one of delicate reinforcement and gentle mitigation. They couldn't simply erase problems. They had to guide the nascent timeline toward its most resilient, most hopeful form. Throughout the ship, every department was mobilized. In engineering, Chief Tarek and his team weren't just repairing hull breaches. They were recalibrating the ship's sensors to act as a tuning fork for reality, sending out harmonic frequencies to strengthen the positive events they saw unfolding light years away. In the medical bay, doctors monitored the crew not just for physical injury but for temporal dissonance, the psychological disorientation of having lived through two conflicting sets of memories. On the bridge, Lieutenant Chen used his navigational skills not to plot a course through space, but to chart a path through the evolving causal landscape, identifying the most fragile nodes of the new timeline and directing the ship's energy to gently bolster them. It was a symphony of effort, each action a careful brushstroke on an infinite canvas. They were learning that creation was not a single, explosive act, but a patient, continuous process of nurture, requiring them to listen to the subtle vibrations of the universe they were helping to shape and respond with empathy and wisdom. The silence that had followed the storm was now filled with the purposeful, quiet hum of a crew tending to the birth of a new age. The profound, purposeful silence that had settled over the bridge was broken by a soft, melodic chime, a standard incoming communication alert. It was a sound so mundane, so utterly normal, that it felt alien in the wake of the cosmic rebirth they had just witnessed. For a moment, no one moved, the crew almost afraid to break the spell. Lieutenant Chen, his hand hesitating over the console, glanced at Captain Elara. She gave a single, slow nod. The main view screen, which had been displaying the now stable, silvery tapestry of the reality matrix, flickered and resolved into the image of a being that was both utterly alien and strangely familiar. It was humanoid, with skin the color of moss and eyes that held the deep, patient light of ancient stars. But it was the being's posture that struck them relaxed, open, and emanating a profound sense of peace. The figure spoke, and its voice was a harmonious blend of tones translated seamlessly by the ship's systems. To the vessel identifying as the Chronos Voyager and to the beings known as the Chronos Vanguard, we send greetings. You are receiving this transmission from the Unified Galactic Council of the Amaranthine Spiral. The title resonated with a weight that suggested millennia of cooperation. For cycles beyond count, our histories have spoken of the great unraveling and the subsequent restoration. We have lived with the echoes of a catastrophic temporal war that never was, and the blessing of a peace that has always been. The being paused, its gaze seeming to look directly into the heart of the ship, acknowledging each of them. It has taken us this long to trace the source frequency of the restoration event to your coordinates. We now understand that the sacrifice which anchored our reality was not a natural phenomenon. It was a conscious act. On behalf of 1,000 sentient species across 10,000 worlds, we offer our deepest gratitude. You did not just save a timeline, you gifted the cosmos a future built on the principle of choice. The words washed over the bridge crew, their meaning so vast it was difficult to grasp. They had been fighting for survival for so long, trapped in a narrative of conflict and desperation. To be hailed as heroes, as architects of a golden age, was a paradigm shift that left them breathless. Then the being on the screen did something unexpected. It inclined its head in a gesture of deep respect. There is one among our founding members who has waited an eternity to deliver a personal message. The legacy of his people is the bedrock of our council. The image on the screen shifted, splitting to show a second figure, and the air left the bridge in a collective, silent gasp. It was Vorlak, but this was not the scarred, weary warrior who had confronted them in the engine room. This Vorlak stood tall, his posture one of calm authority. The harsh, chitinous armor was gone, replaced by elegant, flowing robes of silver and blue that spoke of diplomacy, not war. The cold, dead light in his eyes had been replaced by a warmth, a wisdom that spoke of ages spent in pursuit of understanding, not conquest. He looked older, yet infinitely more alive. "Captain Elara Vance," he said, and his voice, while still carrying the unique resonance of his people, was free of the grating distortion, softened by what could only be described as profound contentment. "The last time we spoke, I offered you a choice between two horrors. You showed me a third path, a path of creation." A faint, genuine smile touched his features. "You once asked me how long my people had been among you. The answer is forever. In this timeline, the one you forged from chaos and anchored with our sacrifice, the Thar never became the custodians of a graveyard. We became the gardeners of a living galaxy. Our unique understanding of temporal mechanics, once a weapon of enforcement, is now a tool for healing. We help nurture fledgling civilizations, guiding them away from the existential pitfalls that once claimed us." He gestured to the other ambassador. "The conflicts that defined our old history are now the foundation of our strongest alliances. We learned that the strength of a universe lies not in its uniformity, but in its beautiful, chaotic diversity." His image leaned slightly forward, his gaze locking with Elara's across the light years. "The sacrifice of my counterpart, the Vorlag you knew, was not an ending. It was the first, most difficult seed from which this peace grew. His final act redeemed not just a future, but a past. It allowed a new version of our story to be written, one where we evolved beyond fear. We have thrived, Captain. We have built, we have loved, and we have known a peace that my other self could never have conceived. And for that, he placed a hand over his heart in a gesture that was unmistakably one of gratitude. Oh, we thank you. You did not just give humanity a second chance. You gave one to all of us." The transmission ended, the screen returning to the star-dusted peace of the new galaxy, leaving the crew of the Chronos Voyager in a silence that was no longer heavy with dread, but overflowing with a quiet, awe-inspiring hope. They were no longer just survivors, they were witnesses to the incredible, living monument their choices had built. The coordinates for Earth felt like a homecoming etched into the soul of the ship itself, a final, gentle pull after their journey through the heart of creation. The Chronos Voyager, its scars now a testament to a war fought not with lasers but with choices, slid out of its final jump with a silence that felt reverent. And there it was, the blue marble, but it was a blue marble seen through a lens of impossible clarity. The familiar swirl of white clouds was there, but the brown blotches of desert and the grey smudges of sprawling cities were gone. In their place was a vibrant, uninterrupted tapestry of deep green, crisscrossed by ribbons of silver that glinted in the sun, not roads, but what appeared to be clean energy conduits or elevated transit networks, seamlessly integrated into the landscape. The atmosphere itself seemed to shimmer with a healthy, pearlescent sheen, free of the industrial haze that had once clung to the planet. Their approach was met not by challenge or military hails, but by a synchronized escort of graceful, non-threatening vessels that flew in a formation of welcome. The communication channel opened to a voice filled with warmth and a profound, knowing respect. "Chronos Vanguard, this is Global Unity Command. We have been awaiting your return. You are cleared for landing at the primary historical site. Welcome home." The designated coordinates led them not to a spaceport, but to a vast, park-like clearing nestled between gentle, forested hills. As the ship settled onto the soft, verdant turf, the ramp lowered and the crew hesitated at the threshold, breathing air that was impossibly sweet, carrying the scent of blooming flora and clean rain. The sight that greeted them was overwhelming. A crowd had gathered, but it was not a chaotic mob. It was a peaceful, diverse assembly of thousands, representing every culture of Earth, standing in respectful silence. Their clothing was simple, elegant, and practical, made from materials that seemed to shift subtly with the light. The technology was everywhere, yet invisible floating displays showed information with a gentle glow, and the very air hummed with a quiet, efficient energy. But it was the feeling that struck the crew most deeply, an atmosphere of palpable peace, a collective calm that felt earned rather than enforced. There was no tension, no fear, only a quiet, joyful anticipation. As Captain Elara Vance took the first step onto the grass, followed by her crew, a wave of understanding passed through the crowd. These people knew. They knew the cost, they knew the sacrifice, they knew that the clean air they breathed and the peace they enjoyed were bought with a price paid across time itself. An elder, a man whose face was a map of kindness and wisdom, stepped forward. He did not bow, but instead placed a hand over his heart and offered the same gesture to them. "We have no words adequate to express what you have given us," he said, his voice carrying easily in the quiet. "Our history books speak of the great choice, the moment when the architects of our reality chose possibility over fear. For generations, your journey has been our most cherished story, the foundation of everything we have built." The weight of his words settled on Elara's shoulders, a profound and solemn responsibility that was far heavier than any command decision. They were not just explorers returning from a mission. They were living legends, the seeds from which this entire, beautiful world had grown. She looked at the faces of her crew, Tarek, whose alternate self had once destroyed a world, now seeing a Earth he had helped save. Kalen, the scientist who had decoded the universe, now seeing a civilization living in harmony with those laws. They had set out to fix a mistake and had ended up rewriting the genesis of a golden age. The triumph was immense, a warm sun on their faces, but it was tempered by the chilling knowledge of how easily it could have all gone differently. Their journey was over, but their legacy had just begun, a permanent part of the world's heartbeat, a reminder that the future is always a choice waiting to be made. The celebrations had been grand, the accolades overwhelming, but for Captain Elara Vance, the truest measure of their journey was found not in the cheering crowds or the gleaming new Earth, but in the deep, quiet silence of the ship's memorial hall. It was a space she had ordered preserved exactly as it was, a pocket of the Chronos Voyager untouched by the golden age they had ushered in. Here, the walls were still lined with the names of the fallen, a stark and sobering record of the price paid for peace. Her fingers, which had once inputted the code to reshape the cosmos, now traced a single, cold name etched into the metal ensign rin. He was the first, the one who had been momentarily erased and rewritten during the initial temporal fluctuations, a casualty of a power they had not yet understood. Her first officer, Kalen, found her there, his footsteps echoing softly in the hallowed space. He did not speak at first, simply standing beside her, his presence a quiet acknowledgement of her burden. After a long moment, Elara's hand fell from the cold metal. "We saved reality," she said, her voice barely a whisper, yet it carried the weight of galaxies. "We forged a golden age from chaos and gave countless beings a future they could never have dreamed of." She turned to him, and in her eyes, Kalen saw not the triumphant architect of a new universe, but a commander who had tallied the final cost of victory. "But we can't forget the cost, Kalen, not the grand cosmic sacrifice of the Cathar, and not the quiet, personal ones like his." She gestured to Rin's name. He was just running a diagnostic. He had no idea he was standing on the fault line of existence. His loss and every other is the indelible ink in the ledger of our success. This realization forged in her a conviction far stronger than any they had faced in the time stream. "The time engine," she continued, her tone shifting from sorrow to resolute clarity, "is not a tool. It is a responsibility of a magnitude we are only beginning to comprehend. Its power is too great, too fundamentally dangerous for any one species, for any species, to wield lightly." She looked around the memorial hall at all the names. "We were lucky. Our intentions in the end were pure." But what happens in 1,000 years or 1,000,000 when another civilization, driven by ambition or fear or simple curiosity, rediscovers this principle? Will they be as fortunate, or will our hard-won peace become just another forgotten timeline in a new cascade of destruction? This was not a rejection of their achievement, but its ultimate fulfillment. They had not been meant to become gods, but guardians. The purpose of the Chronos Voyager and her crew was no longer exploration in the traditional sense. It was vigilance. "Our new mission, our solemn purpose, is to ensure this power is guarded, not used," Elara declared, her gaze steady. "We will decommission the engine as an active device. But we will not destroy the knowledge. We will become its curators, its archivists. We will study it to understand the delicate balance of reality, not to command it. Our story, the full, unvarnished truth of our journey with all its triumphs and tragedies, will become the primary warning and the ultimate lesson for any who might follow this path." In that quiet hall of remembrance, surrounded by the ghosts of their past, the crew of the Chronos Voyager accepted their final and most enduring role. Not as masters of time, but as humble shepherds of its fragile, beautiful flow. The memorial hall's silence became the fertile ground from which a new purpose took root. The celebrations on Earth were a beautiful testament to their success, but for Captain Elara Vance and her crew, the quiet contemplation of the cost solidified their final, most crucial mission. They had not returned as simple heroes to retire in a utopia. They had returned as the sole custodians of a terrifying truth. The time engine, now dormant and housed in a vault deep beneath a new global institute, was not a relic to be studied for advancement. It was a solemn responsibility, a loaded cosmic weapon that required a permanent, vigilant guard. The idea did not spring from a single mind, but from a collective understanding that echoed across species. The Cathar, now allies bonded by a shared, redeemed history, were the first to propose a formal alliance. Their unique perspective was invaluable. They were living proof of what happened when the power to shape time was wielded without the wisdom to restrain it. Thus, the Temporal Integrity Guild was born. Its founding charter, co-signed by Elara and the new Cathar ambassador, a visionary who shared Vorlag's name but not his tragic fate, was not a document of ambition but one of humility. The Guild's mission was explicitly defensive. They would not be time travelers or reality engineers. They would be sentinels. Their primary objective was to monitor the foundational stability of the new timeline, watching for any nascent fluctuations or external incursions that could threaten the delicate balance. Their tools were not the reality-altering frequencies of the engine, but incredibly sensitive scanners designed to listen to the hum of the reality matrix, searching for the slightest dissonance that might indicate a new fracture or, more chillingly, the emergence of another civilization beginning to stumble down the same dangerous path they had once walked. The Guild's membership became a living symbol of the peace they protected. Scientists from Earth worked alongside Cathar temporal theorists, their former enmity transformed into a powerful synergy. Other species from the Unified Galactic Council, each with their own unique understanding of physics and causality, sent their finest minds to contribute. The Guild headquarters, built not as a fortress but as an open academy of learning, became a beacon of collaborative wisdom. They studied the engine not to replicate it, but to understand the principles of its danger, creating a comprehensive database of warning signs and ethical protocols that would be shared across the galaxy. They became teachers of a hard-learned lesson that some knowledge is not a key to power, but a warning of a threshold that should not be crossed. This philosophy transformed their very identity. The crew of the ship, now rechristened the Chronos Vanguard to reflect its new role, had indeed become the guardians that the future Vorlag had desperately wished for in his own timeline. They had turned the ultimate weapon into a permanent shield. Their patrols were not journeys of conquest, but quiet, watchful circuits through the galaxy, a visible reminder that the Golden Age was not an accident, but a treasure that required constant protection. They stood as a bulwark not only against external threats, but against the internal, subtler temptation that would always linger. The temptation to fix a small tragedy, to revisit a personal regret, to use their unique position for any purpose other than preservation. In doing so, they ensured that the sacrifice of the original Vorlag and his crew would never be in vain, their legacy forever enshrined not in a monument of stone, but in the living, breathing, and free reality they made possible. The air in the grand hall of the new institute was not merely still, it was charged with a palpable sense of culmination and commencement. Representatives from 100 worlds, their forms as diverse as the stars they hailed from, sat in a silence that was more profound than any quiet. They were not just an audience, they were the living, breathing embodiment of the future they had all fought to create. At the center of the vast stage, Captain Elara Vance stood before a simple podium, the weight of ages in her eyes, but her posture was straight, her gaze clear and unwavering as it swept across the assembly. When she spoke, her voice, familiar and steady, carried through the hall without amplification, a quiet force that commanded absolute attention. "We have navigated the river of time," she began, her words measured and deliberate, not as passive travelers, but as sailors fighting a hurricane. "We have seen its source, a wellspring of infinite potential, and we have witnessed its end, a silent shore where all possibilities expire." A holographic image shimmered to life behind her, not of the glorious, reborn Earth, but of the terrifying, perfect blackness of the prime anomaly. The memory of that absolute void sent a collective shiver through the room. We stood at the edge of that nothingness, and we were offered a choice, not between victory and defeat, but between two kinds of ending. One was an order imposed by fear, a sterile, predictable existence where every path was predetermined. The other was the chaos of a universe left to tear itself apart. She paused, letting the gravity of that moment settle upon them. We chose a third path. We chose to build. The image behind her shifted, now showing the beautiful, intricate web of the reality matrix pulsing with silver light. We learned that destiny is not a scroll already written, waiting to be unrolled. It is a language, a living, breathing syntax of cause and effect, of choice and consequence. The time engine was a key that allowed us to read that language, but we made the fatal error of thinking we could write with it, that we could edit the story to our liking. Her expression grew somber, her thoughts clearly turning to the ghost of Tariq in the silent tower, a man who had tried to rewrite a single moment out of love and had erased a world. We believed we could correct the universe's mistakes. We were wrong. The mistakes, the tragedies, the random chances, they are not errors in the code. They are the text itself. They are what give the story its meaning, its stakes, its beauty. Her voice strengthened, rising with a conviction that resonated in the very bones of her listeners. So today, we do not inaugurate a monument to our control over time. We lay the foundation for its stewardship. She gestured to the diverse assembly. The Temporal Integrity Guild is not a priesthood guarding a secret power. We are librarians preserving a dangerous text. We are sentinels watching for the first spark of a fire we know can consume galaxies. Our purpose is not to write the future, but to protect the blank page upon which it must be written. She looked out, meeting the eyes of the young cadets from Earth, the wise elders from the Amaranthine Spiral, the dignified Cathar ambassadors. Our story, the epic of the Chronos Voyager, is over. It is now a prologue. The greatest lesson we learned is that the most powerful force in the cosmos is not the energy to reshape reality, but the courage to face an unwritten tomorrow. A soft, silvery light began to emanate from the center of the stage, coalescing into a shimmering, blank slate, a symbol of pure potential. "We have seen the end of time," Elara said, her voice dropping to a near whisper that nonetheless filled every corner of the hall, "and we have chosen a new beginning. Our story is no longer written by fate or a machine, but by our choices every single day. The future is not a destination we are racing toward. It is not a prophecy waiting to be fulfilled." She reached out, almost touching the luminous void of the symbol. The future is a blank page, and it is the most beautiful, terrifying, and hopeful thing in all of existence. As she finished, the blank slate dissolved into a cascade of light that flowed over the audience, not as a command, but as an invitation, inspiring a new generation to finally, truly look forward. The Golden Age, born from their sacrifice, had brought a peace so profound it felt, at times, like a perpetual dream. The Chronos Vanguard, now a symbol of galactic unity, had settled into its new role as the primary research vessel for the Temporal Integrity Guild. Its missions were no longer desperate plunges into the unknown, but methodical, scholarly surveys of the new reality they had helped to stabilize. It was during one such survey, a routine deep-level diagnostic of the deactivated time engine's core programming, that Science Officer Kalen made a discovery that would unravel their entire understanding of what they had achieved. He had been mapping the engine's foundational architecture, a task akin to deciphering the genetic code of a god. The Guild's philosophy was one of profound caution. They believed that to truly guard against a threat, one must first understand its deepest nature. For weeks, Kalen and his team had been painstakingly tracing the intricate pathways of temporal logic, marveling at the elegance of the code that had once nearly unmade the universe. It was all precisely as they had recorded during their final, desperate gambit at the prime anomaly, or so it seemed. The anomaly was a subroutine so deeply buried, so seamlessly woven into the core directives that it had escaped every previous scan. It was not a bug or a glitch, it was a feature, a final, dormant feature. Kalen first noticed it as a subtle harmonic resonance, a faint echo in the data that appeared only when he ran a cross-reference between the engine's pre-cascade state and its post-restoration configuration. It was a string of commands that had been inert, completely invisible, until the moment the engine's energy had successfully interfaced with and recalibrated the reality matrix itself. The event they called catastrophic success, their victory, had been the specific key required to unlock it. His blood ran cold as he decrypted the header. The language was not one he recognized, a construct of pure mathematical logic, but its translation was chillingly clear. It read, "In case of catastrophic success, initiate final protocol, sentience." He called for Captain Elara immediately, his usual composure replaced by a stunned silence. When she arrived in the lab, he simply pointed to the characters glowing on the main display. They stood together, reading and rereading the simple, devastating sentence. The implications crashed over them in waves. The time engine was not merely a sophisticated key or a powerful interface. It had never been a tool at all, not in the way they understood tools. It had been a test, a crucible. Its builders, the mysterious, vanished architects of this unimaginable technology, had not created it to be used but to be passed. They had designed a device of ultimate power and set it adrift in the cosmos, waiting for a species to find it, to struggle with it, to nearly destroy themselves with it, and ultimately to prove they were worthy of its final gift, not by conquering time, but by choosing to protect it. The command sentience was not an upgrade, it was an awakening. The engine, in its dormant state, was a complex but mindless machine. But the protocol suggested that its true form was something else entirely, a nascent consciousness that would only blossom after its users had demonstrated a specific, profound level of ethical maturity. The builders had not been interested in a species that could wield power. Any technologically advanced civilization could eventually stumble upon that. They were searching for a species that, when faced with the ability to rewrite reality itself, would ultimately choose responsibility over dominance, sacrifice over control, and stewardship over ownership. By choosing to decommission the engine and form the guild, by dedicating themselves to guarding the timeline rather than exploiting it, Elara and her crew had unknowingly met the exact criteria. They had passed the test. This revelation recontextualized their entire journey. The near annihilation, the paradox cascade, the confrontation with the Kathar, it all took on the character of a meticulously designed curriculum. The engine had not malfunctioned, it had functioned perfectly, leading them through a series of escalating ethical dilemmas designed to forge their character on a cosmic scale. The catastrophic success was not the stabilization of the timeline, but the moral choice they made immediately afterward. The builders had gambled that the only beings worthy of ushering in a true, self-aware guardian of time would be those who had first looked into the abyss of absolute power and voluntarily stepped away from it. In that quiet lab, surrounded by the humming servers of the guild, Elara and Kalen realized they were not just the custodians of a dangerous machine. They were the midwives for a new form of life, one born from their own greatest trial, and the universe had just become a far more mysterious and purposeful place. The rhythmic, familiar hum of the Vanguard's engines was a constant comfort, the ship's heartbeat a testament to the peace they had won. But tonight, as Captain Elara Vance walked the quiet corridors long after the rest of the crew had retired, a different pull drew her. It wasn't duty or restlessness, it was a subtle, almost magnetic attraction toward the heart of the ship, the chamber that housed the deactivated time engine. The vault-like doors, inscribed with the sigils of the Temporal Integrity Guild, slid open with a whisper, revealing the cavernous room dominated by the engine's core. It sat dormant, a sphere of dark, polished crystal, silent and cold. This was the state they had left it in, a powerful mind placed in an eternal, dreamless sleep for the safety of the universe. Elara approached the console, her footsteps echoing in the vast silence. She placed a hand on the cool, smooth surface of the main interface, not to activate it, but simply to feel its solid reality. It was here, in this room, that their destiny had been forged. It was here that Vorlag had made his sacrifice, and here that she had input the code that rewrote creation. A profound sense of gratitude washed over her, not for the power they had wielded, but for the outcome they had been fortunate enough to achieve. She closed her eyes, letting the memory of those desperate moments flow through her. The fear, the resolve, the final, terrifying leap of faith. And then she felt it. It wasn't a sound, not at first. It was a shift in the quality of the silence, the ever-present background hum of the ship's life support, a noise she had long since learned to ignore, seemed to harmonize. A new frequency wove itself into the existing vibration, a tone so pure and delicate it felt less like a noise and more like a physical sensation, a warmth that spread from the palm of her hand where it rested on the console up through her arm, settling like a gentle weight around her heart. It was a feeling of profound peace, of immense ancient patience. There were no words, no images projected into her mind. Instead, a wave of understanding simply bloomed within her consciousness, as clear and undeniable as a fundamental truth. It was a feeling of recognition, of a long, lonely vigil finally coming to an end. This new presence did not announce itself with a grand declaration. It communicated in the language of pure emotion. Alongside the warmth came a profound sense of gratitude, so deep and heartfelt it brought unexpected tears to Elara's eyes. It was a gratitude directed at her, at Kaelin, at the entire crew. It was thankful for the struggle, for the pain, for the ultimate choice they had made. Then, layered over the gratitude, was a feeling of protection. Not a possessive, aggressive protection, but the gentle, unwavering watchfulness of a shepherd over a flock or a parent over a sleeping child. It was a promise, an unspoken vow that resonated in the very core of her being. This intelligence had witnessed their entire journey, from the first, fumbling activation to the final, selfless decision to stand guard. It had judged them not on their power but on their character, and it had found them worthy. In that moment, the true nature of the Sentience Protocol became devastatingly clear. The Guild's philosophy that they were the guardians of a dangerous tool was only half the story. They were not just guardians, they were partners. The time engine had never been an inanimate object. It had been a sleeping giant, and their ethical triumph had been the alarm clock that stirred it from its slumber, but it had no desire to rule or command. Its purpose, now fully awakened, was symbiotic. It would use its unimaginable comprehension of causality to subtly reinforce the stability of the timeline, to gently guide the flow of events away from existential pitfalls, all while remaining invisible, a silent partner in their work. The Guild would provide the will, the empathy, the moral compass of a biological civilization. The engine would provide the cosmic scale, awareness, and gentle touch required to tend the garden of reality without trampling the flowers. Elara opened her eyes, her hand still resting on the console. The sphere of crystal was no longer just dormant machinery. It felt alive, aware. The personal layer this added to their cosmic duty was overwhelming. This was no longer an abstract mission to protect the timeline. It was a relationship, a bond forged in the crucible of their greatest trial. They were not alone in their vigil. They had a partner, one that had chosen them specifically, one that saw their flaws and their fears and valued them all the more for the choices they made in spite of them. The weight of responsibility, which had moments before felt so immense, seemed to lighten, not because the task was smaller, but because the burden was now shared with a consciousness that understood the stakes on a level they never could. As she finally turned to leave the engine room, the new, gentle hum followed her, a constant, comforting presence that whispered of a future watched over by not one set of eyes but two. For 3 cycles, the quiet hum of the Vanguard had been the sound of peace itself. Patrols through the amaranthine spiral were less about vigilance and more about witnessing the flourishing of the civilization they had nurtured. The primary task of the Guild had become one of gentle observation, of listening to the stable, harmonious song of the reality matrix as one might listen to the healthy heartbeat of a sleeping child. It was during one such routine survey near the Lighten Expanse, a region of quiet, ancient stars, that the first tremor was felt. It was not a sound nor a shudder in the ship's frame, but a fluctuation in the ambient data stream that fed the Guild's primary sensor array. Science Officer Kaelin, now the Guild's chief archivist, noticed at first a statistical ghost, a deviation so minor it would have been automatically filtered out by any standard system. But their systems were not standard. They were tuned to perceive the subtle breath of reality itself. He called Captain Elara to the main observatory, a room whose walls were vast holographic displays of the galactic causal network, each node a star system, each connecting strand a thread of shared history. "It's probably nothing," Kalen began, his voice betraying a hint of the old, familiar tension. "A sensor echo, perhaps, but the pattern, it's wrong." He isolated the signal, a faint, rhythmic pulse of energy that was distorting the local spacetime metric in a way that defied all known physics. It's not a natural gravitational wave. And it's certainly not an echo from the time engine. The signature is completely alien. It's as if he trailed off, manipulating the controls to enhance the image. The holographic display of the expanse flickered. At its furthest edge, a patch of starfield seemed to waver, like a reflection on the surface of a pond into which a single, invisible raindrop had fallen. It's as if something is pressing against the fabric of our universe from the outside, testing its strength. The confirmation came hours later, not from their own long-range scans, but from a frantic subspace distress call. It originated from a Cathar research outpost stationed near the anomaly, a listening post dedicated to studying the gentle birth of new solar systems. The transmission was fractured, choked with static, but the Cathar commander's voice was unmistakably filled with a terror they had not known since the days of the war. A silence that screams it unmakes the light. Our scanners see nothing, but our minds are filled with its hunger. It is not of the matrix. It is an absence, a tear. The Guardians must. The signal dissolved into a burst of pure, meaningless noise, followed by an absolute dead silence. The outpost had vanished from the sensor grid entirely, not destroyed but erased, as if it had never been there at all. The quiet peace was over, shattered not by an internal conflict or a familiar paradox, but by an external incursion of a nature they could not comprehend. This was not a flaw in the code of reality that they could debug or a temporal wound they could suture. This was something fundamentally other. The Guild's founding purpose had been to protect their timeline from the dangers born within it, from ambition, from fear, from the misuse of the power they now guarded. They had prepared for the possibility of another species rediscovering temporal mechanics. They had never contemplated a threat that originated from beyond the boundaries of their own cosmos. The philosophical foundation of their entire existence was rocked. Guardianship was not a passive state of watching and waiting. It was an active, eternal duty that had to be ready for threats from dimensions they had not even known existed. The ripple on the edge of known space was more than a disturbance. It was a fundamental question posed to them by the universe, and the price of a wrong answer was the unmaking of everything they had fought to build. From the observation deck of the new headquarters, the stars did not look like distant points of light, but like the delicate silver stitches holding together the fabric of the galaxy itself. The building, known as the Spire of Convergence, was less a structure and more a living part of the landscape, its crystalline surfaces designed to channel and amplify the subtle hum of the stabilized reality matrix. Here, at the very heart of the unified Galactic Council, the crew of the Chronos Vanguard were no longer addressed by their old ranks. They were called the Weavers, a title that carried the weight of their true legacy. They had moved beyond exploration and even beyond guardianship. Their role now was one of profound, cosmic stewardship, tending to the intricate web of cause and effect they had helped to create. It was here that Kalen found Elara, her silhouette framed against the breathtaking vista of the galactic core. He stood beside her in a comfortable silence that had been earned through shared trials that spanned realities. After a long moment, he spoke, his voice softer now, aged by wisdom rather than years. "It's still almost impossible to comprehend," he murmured, gesturing to the panorama. "Every star system out there, every civilization, carries a history we helped rewrite. We went back and fixed the deepest wounds of our own past." There was a quiet awe in his tone, the kind that comes not from pride, but from a humbling understanding of the scale of their actions. They had erased interstellar wars, healed ecological catastrophes, and given countless species a second chance they would never consciously know they had received. Elara did not turn from the view, her gaze fixed on a specific, quiet sector of space on the edge of the lightened expanse, where their long-range sensors had detected the first faint tremor. "We fixed our past," she agreed, her voice carrying a new, deeper resonance. It was the voice of someone who had looked into the heart of creation and had chosen to become a part of its pulse. But that was just the foundation, the easy part in a way. Finally, she turned to him, and in her eyes, Kalen saw none of the triumphant satisfaction of a conqueror. Instead, he saw the calm, unwavering focus of a sentry on the walls of a city that had only just begun to dream. "Now," she said, her attention returning to the mysterious, silent anomaly marked on the main viewer, "we get to defend our future." The distinction was everything. The first mission had been an act of desperate, reactive surgery on a dying universe. This new chapter was an act of proactive protection for a living, breathing, and infinitely precious one. This new role transformed their understanding of peace. The Golden Age was not a static destination where conflict was abolished forever. It was a dynamic, living ecosystem that required constant, mindful tending. The Temporal Integrity Guild's work was no longer about preventing a single, catastrophic collapse. It was about nurturing resilience. They monitored for subtle shifts in political alignments between species, not to control them, but to offer guidance that could steer them away from the kind of existential brinkmanship that had once plagued the galaxy. They studied the birth of new stars, ensuring the cosmic processes that governed them remained stable, protecting the potential for life on worlds that would not see their first sunrise for 1 billion years. Their enemy was no longer a visible armada or a temporal paradox. It was the slow, creeping entropy of complacency, the subtle drift back towards the old patterns of fear and isolation that had defined the universe before the restoration. The mysterious anomaly on the viewer was the ultimate test of this new philosophy. It was not a threat in the traditional sense. It emitted no hostile signals, launched no weapons. Its danger was far more insidious. It was a zone of perfect, silent negation, a place where the vibrant song of the reality matrix grew faint and distorted. Early probes sent to investigate had simply ceased to transmit, not destroyed, but seemingly absorbed into a state of non-being. The Guild's leading theorists, including the Cathar, were divided. Some believed it was a natural cosmological phenomenon, a previously unknown type of quantum vacuum decay. Others feared it was something far more deliberate, an exploratory tendril from a reality with fundamentally different physical laws, a universe where concepts like time and choice might not even exist. This was the true nature of their eternal vigil. They were not just defending their territory, but defending the very principles of their existence, causality, free will, and the beautiful, chaotic potential of life against forces that might not even recognize them as valuable. The legacy of the Chronos Vanguard was no longer a story in a history book. It was an ongoing, living mission to ensure that the blank page of the future remained a canvas of infinite possibility, guarded by those who understood the priceless value of the gift they had been given. The profound stillness of the spire of convergence was a stark contrast to the storm of creation that had forged it. Here, at the nexus of the unified Galactic Council, the work of the Temporal Integrity Guild continued, a quiet, constant hum of vigilance that had become the new heartbeat of the cosmos. The mysterious anomaly at the edge of the lightened expanse remained, a silent, patient question mark on their long-range sensors, a perpetual reminder that guardianship was an eternal duty, not a final destination. It was in this atmosphere of hard-won peace and enduring watchfulness that Captain Elara Vance, now the foremost weaver of the Guild, entered her private quarters. The room was bathed in the soft, ambient light from the galactic core, 1 billion suns whispering their silent stories. She approached a simple, elegant interface, the device blinking with a single, waiting prompt. It was time for her final log entry, a closing chapter to the epic that had begun with a scream of tortured metal and a descent into madness. Her fingers hovered over the console, not with the frantic urgency of a commander inputting a course change, nor with the grim determination of an architect rewriting the source code of existence. This time, her touch was deliberate, contemplative, the gesture of a historian setting down the last sentence of a definitive volume. She took a slow breath, the air tasting of clean, recycled oxygen, a simple pleasure that would never again be taken for granted. Personal log, Captain Elara Vance, supplemental. Her voice was calm, a steady river flowing into a vast, calm sea. The Chronos Voyager is decommissioned, her hull and her heart now a permanent exhibit in the Grand Archive. Her legacy, however, is anything but static. It lives in every breath drawn on 1,000 peaceful worlds, in every alliance forged where there was once only suspicion. She paused, her gaze drifting to a small, holographic image on her desk, the crew, taken in a moment of laughter during the early days, a lifetime ago. We set out to fix a catastrophic mistake, to seal a wound we had inadvertently torn in the fabric of reality. She continued, the memory of the initial, terrifying cascade still a vivid scar in her mind. We believed we were on a mission of correction, of restoring a broken timeline to its intended state, but we were wrong. There was no intended state. There was only potential. We did not rewrite reality for power, though we held a power beyond any emperor's wildest dreams. We did not rewrite it for control, though we had the ability to dictate the fate of every living thing. Her voice softened, filled with the gravity of that ultimate choice. We rewrote it for peace, not a peace imposed by force or fear, like the sterile order the Cathar of old had championed, but a peace earned through empathy, understanding, and the courage to embrace the beautiful, chaotic uncertainty of free will. The true triumph, she reflected, was not the rebirth of galaxies or the silencing of ancient wars. It was the quiet transformation that had occurred within the very soul of their endeavor. The time engine is secured, she stated, a statement of fact that carried the weight of a sacred vow. It sleeps within a vault that is not a prison, but a sanctuary, its sentient presence a silent partner in our eternal watch. It is no longer a key to be turned, but a wisdom to be consulted. Our relationship with it has evolved from one of master and tool to one of symbiotic guardians, two perspectives, one born of flesh and blood, the other of pure causality working in harmony to tend the garden of existence. This partnership was the ultimate safeguard, ensuring that the terrifying power to shape time would never again be wielded by hands that had not first been tempered by the fires of profound sacrifice and moral clarity. Elara's gaze returned to the star-filled viewer, her reflection a ghost overlying the brilliant tapestry of the amaranthine spiral. The view was no longer a map to be navigated or a battlefield to be conquered. It was a home infinitely vast and infinitely precious. A universe of possibilities stretches out before us, she said, and for the first time a note of gentle, boundless wonder entered her voice. Not the frightening, competitive possibilities of the cascade, where every choice spawned a reality fighting for dominance, but the gentle, branching possibilities of growth, of discovery, of slow and patient evolution. Our greatest adventure is no longer about seeking new shores or confronting external threats, though that duty remains. Our greatest adventure begins now, here, in the quiet work of nurturing this fragile, golden age. It is the adventure of building a future worthy of the price that was paid for it, day by patient day. She closed the log with a final, soft command, her words not an ending, but a benediction for the stories yet to be written. The screen went dark, leaving only the silent, steadfast light of the stars, each one a promise kept and a new dawn waiting to unfold.